We've had a wonderful lineup of speakers today that I'm honored to be able to follow. And I'm also thrilled to be back at Queen's. It's been quite a few years since I graduated. And if I'm being honest, knowing that next year's class will be wearing a jacket that says 2024 as a Com 14 grad makes me feel a little bit old. Oh, you might chuckle now, but wait until you come back and you see the 2034 grads. But really, I'm thrilled to be back. I love having the opportunity to engage with young leaders. And one of the questions that I get asked the most by young leaders is, how can I be more successful? And usually, I start by telling them to sit down, because it's going to be a while. And we're laughing because we know that success is complicated, and it's nebulous. But today, I want to explore some of the lessons I've learned when it comes to the way that I approach success. And I want to start by focusing on the factors that we actually get to control, because there's a lot of things that we don't. There's factors of luck, being in the right time or the right place, with the right people, and also having access to certain privileges and opportunities. So if we focus on the things that we do get to control, like how hard we work, or what we focus on, or the habits that we develop, and we look at everything that's out there, all of the advice from experts and successful people, what we really quickly start to realize is that while there's also a lot of advice, some of it is contradictory. Take the most mundane example, like what time you woke up this morning. For most of you, it will probably have been around 7 or 8, I'm guessing, to be here with us today. But if we want to emulate the practices of successful people, what time are we actually supposed to get up? If you ask Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, he'll tell you that he swears by getting up at 4 in the morning to get a head start on the day, like many other Silicon Valley executives. But if you ask Arianna Huffington, the founder behind Huffington Post, she'll direct you to an article called Sleeping Your Way to the Top. And no, it's not what you're thinking. What she writes about is the importance of actually getting enough sleep, because we're more productive, and we're less likely to make mistakes when we're well rested. So who's right? How do we figure out what time we should get up? And more broadly, how do we figure out what pieces of advice, when it comes to success, will actually work for us? And as it turns out, the answer to that is rooted in the way that we define success. Because if you pursue a leader's advice who defines success differently from you, or is pursuing something entirely different, it's less likely to work for you. So how do most people define success? As it turns out, if you ask people, almost universally, they'll start by telling you about the things that they want to have. I'll be successful when I have $10 million. I'll be successful when I have a Ferrari. I'll be successful when I become a CEO, or have a perfect family, or have time to travel, and so on and so forth. And as people elaborate on their answers, they'll include the things that they're going to do. Things like getting a PhD, or asking for a promotion at work. But if you ask people to actually dig deeper into what success actually means to them, although everyone is pursuing something different, almost everyone answers with who they want to be. That they want to be more impactful, or innovative, or creative, or driven. And so the way that we define success, as it turns out, is very much linked to who we want to be. And so perhaps the question that we need to ask is one that we ask ourselves, which is, what is it that matters to us? My contention is that if you can define what matters to you, what brings you purpose and joy, what you're passionate about, the things that fulfill you, if you can define what matters, and you can connect that to your career, and more broadly to your life, then you can bring something to the world that is powerful and unique. And that's never been more true than in my experience as an entrepreneur. A few years ago, I attended President Obama's Global Entrepreneurship Summit, as the CEO of my own tech company. And if you asked me how I felt beforehand, I would have told you I was thrilled. I also would have been lying, because really, I was terrified. I was fairly new to entrepreneurship. I was very young. I'd only left school a few years ago. And I hadn't even started out by wanting to be an entrepreneur. I had started out with a little project, inspired by my work at the UN, which grew into a few more projects, which over the course of a few very short months became a company. And I was mostly terrified that I would get there and people would discover I wasn't a real entrepreneur. As it turns out, when I got there, I found out that everyone was a lot like me, that everyone had had a couple sleepless nights, but also that most people don't start out by wanting to build companies. They start out by answering questions. They start out by defining what matters. In other words, they start out with a purpose. And that's true of some of the best innovators and founders and organizations of our time. Think about some of the influential companies that you know. Jeff Bezos, for example, started with a purpose of making it easier for us to buy and sell quite literally anything online when he created Amazon. Mark Zuckerberg started with a purpose of making it easier for us to connect with our family and our friends when he built Facebook. Brian Chesky started with a purpose of making it easier for us to travel. And today, on Airbnb, you can book a villa in Tuscany and a cooking class in Hanoi with a click of a button. And what all of these founders and organizations have in common is they have a purpose. They started with the things that mattered, not just to them, but to the world. And in doing so, they were able to bring something to the world that was powerful and unique, and also remarkably valuable. All three of those examples are companies that are worth over $1 billion today. And this concept isn't just limited to our careers, but it applies to our lives as well. As it turns out, when we set goals without understanding why they matter to us, we're really terrible at actually keeping them. Think about the number of New Year's resolutions that you give up on at some point during the year. Maybe even now as we approach the end of January. And if you're feeling a little bit guilty about that, well, Chinese New Year was yesterday, so you can reset them. But you're also not alone. Marketing shows that about 6 weeks after the new year, in mid-February, there's something called a drop-off point. It's when we actually see people's behaviors start to change and they give up on their New Year's goals. So for example, one of the most common goals is to get healthy. And about 6 weeks in, what we see is gym usage declines from January, and fast food sales rise. In other words, we give up on being healthy about 6 weeks in. We say, well, we haven't made it to the gym, and we're not being that healthy, and we really want fries. So as it turns out, setting goals without understanding why they matter makes them really difficult to actually achieve. But what happens if we bring the two together? There's two people in my life who do this really well. My friend Chris and his wife Mel. And they're great at integrating the things that matter to them holistically throughout their lives. And they're very successful personally and professionally as a result. And one of the ways they do this is actually through a spreadsheet. And it's a model I've adapted to my own life as well. So the spreadsheet lists 3 things. The first is all of the things that matter to you. So some of mine include my friends and family, my career, and my health. And then you list why each of those things matter to you. So if we take the last example, my health matters to me because I can do my best only when I'm healthy, whether I'm giving a TED Talk or surfing in Bali. And then under each of those categories, you can list your goals. And the reason that it's important to know why we have those goals is when we revisit our goals, it allows us to revise accordingly. So you might start the year by saying, you're going to go to the gym 3 times a week. And then partway through February, what you realize is that you're actually really stressed. And what you need is just to get more sleep, because that's important too. And so by being intentional in defining the things that matter, why they matter, and revisiting and revising our goals as often as we need to, we can be successful in fulfilling our goals and also integrating our purpose into our lives. And we've seen the importance of purpose, both in our careers and our personal lives. But what if you don't know what your purpose is? What if you don't know what matters? What if you're not sure what you're passionate about or what fulfills you? And I've been in that exact position before. A couple of years ago, when I started at Queen's, maybe a few more than I'd actually like to admit, I wanted to become an accountant. And I had started out with the intention of pursuing my CPA, and that was my 5-year plan. My 5-year plan lasted about 5 weeks. When I actually started to do accounting, I realized that it wasn't for me. But what I learned from that experience was that sometimes the best way to figure out what you like, or even what you don't like, which is equally important, is just to go out there and try it. The same way you won't know whether or not you like a new food until you take your first bite. And as it turns out, the advice that we commonly receive to just do what we're passionate about is terrible advice. It's well-intentioned, but it's terrible. Because passion and purpose and fulfillment are things that we build. They're something that we create. They're not intrinsic to who we are, nor do we just discover them along the way. And the belief that we can is incredibly damaging, because it limits our capacity and our willingness to try new things, which is exactly what we should be doing. According to executive coach Jen Lofgren, if you're not sure where to start by doing everything that you're remotely interested in. Absolutely everything. Try fencing for a weekend, go to a conference on sustainability, take a class. Because over days and months and years, the things that you stay interested in, the things that you actually care about, they become the things that matter to you. They become the things that fulfill you. And I want to note that this process of discovering what matters only works if you do the things that you're genuinely interested in, even if only remotely, and not if you do things because you think you should, because we have a tendency to do that. And that tendency actually gets drilled into us very early on in our lives. It actually starts with our education. So early on in your life, if you liked arts or history or music, you might have been told to adapt your interests because math was more important, or English. And even as you pursue higher education and you're told it's your time to explore, there's a certain pressure to have the right portfolio of grades and extracurriculars and internships that will allow you to continue in your education or to enter the job market. So what do we do with that pressure? What do we do if we want to do something different? I think what the answer is courage. We need to have courage in order to do things that are different from our peers, to explore the things that matter, even if it feels like we're the only ones who are interested in it, and to have the courage to forge our own path. And that's not something that's easy, but if you can do that, you get 2 extraordinary benefits. The first is that it's actually easier to be successful, because you're not competing for the same things as everybody else. And when you have something that makes you unique, as we saw earlier, that can be remarkably powerful. The second is that you find where you belong, which is very different from fitting in, where you adapt who you are and what your interests are. But by embracing who you are and embracing the things that matter to you, you find people who share your values, where the only thing you need to do to fit in is just to show up. That's what belonging looks like. So why don't more of us do this? I mean, it sounds really great, right? And I think the reason that a lot of bright, ambitious people don't pursue their own paths is that they're afraid. They're afraid that if they do, they're going to fail. And so we pursue the things that we think we should be doing because we think that it'll guarantee us success. Or at the very least, we can reduce our risk of failure. The problem with this approach is that there's no way to guarantee success. And there's also no way to avoid failure. Because absolutely everything in life that is worth pursuing, whether you want to cure cancer, or fall in love, or build a company, anything in life that's worth doing has some risk of failure. And so I think we need to take a different approach. We need to be kind enough to ourselves to be okay if we fail, and to allow failure to be an option. Because if failure is not an option, neither is learning, or creativity, or growth, or innovation. And so if we're all going to fail, what can we do about that? The best way I found to face failure is to never face it alone. It's to ask for help, and to keep asking for help until you're able to build a network, until you have mentors, peers, friends, and family that you can go to when you hit a tough patch, when you have questions that you don't know how to answer, when you need a little help figuring out what that next step is as you forge your own path. What it comes to, I think, is this. When people ask me, how can I be more successful? What they're really asking me is, how can I be more? Because that question is driven by a desire for success, but often an equally strong fear of failure. And so many of us start our journeys by trying to be more than who we are, because we're afraid that who we are is not enough. That we're not enough to do the things that we want to, or to achieve the things we want to have. And so we spend a lot of time and energy chasing a mythical best version of ourselves, browsing the self-help section, doing the things we're supposed to. And along the way, we forget to discover who we already are. We forget to discover what matters to us, the very things that are actually, ironically, the very foundation for success. And so if you want to be more successful, I think you need to start by recognizing that you are enough. That who you are as you are is already enough to bring something to the world that's powerful and unique and valuable. And that it's true no matter who you are, or where you come from, or where you are in your journey today. It's true even if you feel like you're failing right now. If you failed your last midterm, you haven't heard back from any of the internships you've applied to, or if you're about to graduate and you still have absolutely no idea what you want to do with your life. And I can say that with a little bit more confidence now, because I've experienced all of those things at some point during my time at Queen's. And none of that stopped me from getting to where I am today. What I've learned is that so long as you have the courage to pursue what matters to you, to dare to do the things that you want to courageously, and to embrace who you are, and to be kind to yourself along the journey, you'll discover that you already have absolutely everything you could possibly need to leave your mark in the world. And I am so excited for all of you to discover what that will mean for your lives. Thank you.